You're now listening to the Something Good Podcast Network. Please press any key to continue.
A kiss, as defined by Dan Webster, is something pleasing, a caress, a gentle touch. But there's another kiss that isn't in Webster's.
Hey world, we're Kiss!
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise.
Yeah, Kiss sucks!
Kiss implies the extreme in the theatrics on stage, utilizing fire and smoke and bizarre costumes, and the ever-consistent, constant concealment of their true identities.
Speaking of which, Kiss is going to have its own comic book soon.
Take Kiss with you. It's fun. Show your friends and be the first. Now.
Oh my God, no time to turn!
And welcome once again to No Time to Turn, a Kiss nerd podcast.
Nerds. I got nothing this week.
we have you.
That's right. There we go. Have my pretty face that none of y'all can see on the microphones.
Cap Nunn, ladies and gentlemen. Also joining is Alex Diff, both from the Something Good For You podcast.
Yo.
I'm Russ Ward, and I am your guest, for lack of a better word, host.
Yes, sir.
And we have been trucking through the history of Kiss, album by album, year by year. We're not experts. We don't claim to be. Blah, blah, blah.
We just have read up and have listened to a lot of things regarding Kiss.
And have very strong opinions.
Yes.
Oh, yes. See, last week.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of the Dynasty era, and this is, of course, now a part 2 episode, another multi-part episode. But this is such a big year for Kiss that it sort of warranted multi-episodes.
Yeah, it's hard not to get granular with 1979 in particular.
Yeah, and this is kind of a dark chapter in Kiss history.
Yeah.
And kind of sad too, because when it's all over, it's all over. And in my personal, researching this and stuff, and it delves into a very strong, deeply seated sense of nostalgia I have for this because I lived through it. It's like, man, it kind of almost hurts in a way to see how this all just sort of goes, kaput. But we went through the album Dynasty, track by track, last episode, and some of the, minute detail points on that. So if you haven't listened, maybe go back and give it a check out. Now we're getting into what will be the Dynasty tour, and
everything that comes along with it, because there's a lot.
Yeah, they start planning this as early as late 1978.
Because this was supposed to be like the most grand.
This
stage
is going to be
they're
really going for it on this. They hire people to do costume designing. The costumes are going to be more ornate, and they're going to be much more colorful. Some people call this their Disney costumes, but these are all themed to these color identities that they've developed since the solo albums. The purple, red, green, and blue. A guy named, and I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, Pete Menefee, who would go on to win 3 Emmys, who's nominated 5 times as a costume designer in television and movies. Well, Emmys are television, but so they're getting like professional guys. I think Pete Menefee had done costume design work for Cher, and that might have been
a connection with Gene.
Somewhere in there. Not even necessarily with Gene. I think Cher had ended up hooking up with Casablanca for a nanosecond.
I remember reading that somewhere too. Yeah,
they bought her a Jeep, and in the process pissed off Donna Summer, so they had to buy Donna Summer a Jeep.
Oh well, the thing was, if we're getting to the whole Cher, Donna Summers, Gene Simmons thing, that there was just a whole bunch of weird backstabbing and shit going on.
I don't know. I'm not going to get into that.
I'm not either. But I'm saying, with researching all this, I run across those eras, and I'm like,
well, he didn't. He wasn't. It was Diana Ross.
Diana Ross. Yeah, you're right.
Well, even his own mom would get that confused. Oh, I always loved Donna Wright, whatever.
Donna Dixon.
Bad.
No, wait, that was Paul.
Yeah. So, I don't like to get into we don't like to talk about that stuff on here.
The gossipy episodes.
Yeah. They even hire Kenny Ortega, a dance or I guess a coordinator or whatever. What's the word they call it? A choreographer.
Yes, choreographer. And within my research, that was due to the fact that Sean Delaney and Bill Aucoin kind of were on the outs, and Sean disappeared.
Yeah, I guess Sean's kind of taken to the hills here. I don't. Well, he's got a solo album that's going to come out this year too. That was recorded basically at the same time as Gene's album, solo album, with all the same guys. And
which I do find is interesting because I know Vinnie Ponceo is involved, but didn't Sean have a hand in "I Was Made for Loving You" also?
I don't know. That's a good question.
But if he did, I do find that interesting that he would have been around for the earlier stages, but then by the time it was time to do choreography and staging, he wouldn't have been around.
Well, I don't think he was super involved in it at this point anyway. But here everything is getting... I'm sorry?
I was about to ask if this is when Bill was starting to go off the rails a little bit, too.
Oh, absolutely. And, everything's going to go off the rails here. I mean, this is the era of what is... generally referred to as "quote unquote" super Kiss.
Yeah,
or as I was calling it, the sycophant tour, because basically everyone was in their own little bubble and being placated in some way, shape, or form, and no one was saying no to anyone or anything.
Well, actually, there was, but we'll get to that.
Until they did. Leading up to pulling the trigger.
So you've got Kenny Ortega choreographing dance moves, I guess, primarily for Paul.
Mm-hmm. And he later did stuff with like Ferris Bueller's Day Off and a whole bunch of other big
Dirty
blockbusters.
Dancing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
So this isn't, he went on, this wasn't like some random schmo. This is a guy who knew his shit.
Went on to do big things.
Him and Desmond Child, Paul Stanley just forming the 80s right here.
Really? Yeah. I mean, these guys, you heard it here, yo. Yep. Kiss designed the 80s.
So at that'll be an interesting thing. So at that point, were they truly the trend followers, or were they setting the trends and not following it?
Just Paul.
My head just exploded. So they are. Paul is designing a stage in conjunction with a company called Theater Techniques, and the idea here is to have a stage that is an unobstructed view, a 360-degree view, like you can sit behind the stage and still be able to see it.
Yeah, because if you read his quote, he says that he doesn't want to have anybody feel left out from any side of the stage or experience.
So all of this is going on basically in the winter of '79. I come across an interesting little factoid here. The Kiss logo, the stage sign on the back of the stage, was intended to be updated for this stage, and they were going to ring it neon.
And real quick, before people hop in the comments, it was late 78, not late 79.
Did I say late 79?
You said 79.
Yeah. I was sitting there going like, is that right?
Look, man, I'm an old man, and I have a touch of the Alzheimer's, so just work with me, people. Work with me. So, yeah, I think it's interesting that they were going to update the big Kiss sign in the back, and they didn't. And, of course, that sign doesn't get updated until the 1985 tour, but
wow.
That's another discussion for another day.
That could be its own episode.
Yeah.
It won't be.
So I'm gonna before we get too deep into all this, let me go ahead and tell this story. And if I'm retreading old ground, we can edit this. But on Easter Sunday, 1979, I would have been 8 years old. My brother was 12. We were visiting my grandparents for Easter.
Who'd have thought?
On Easter Sunday, we were visiting my grandparents for Halloween, and Dad called us into the front room, and he's sitting in the chair, and he's got the newspaper folded on his knee, and he has this. I can't imitate my dad very well, but he has this ability to go into this like radio voice, right? When he's very serious, and he gets us in, and he's like, boys. The paper, and I remember this. He slapped the paper. He goes, the paper, patted it on his knee. The paper says, Kiss is coming to Roanoke. Calm down. Would you like to go?
What's the right answer? What's the right answer? What's the right answer?
You know, like I'm going to go, nah, I don't think so. You got to remember, this is, the spring of 79, and there, it'd be like, Russ, if you could do one thing in the world, what would it be? You want to go to Disney World? No. Do you want to go to the moon? No. What do you want? I want to see Kiss.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the end all, be all. That's it. There's nothing higher in my little brain at that point than to be able to see Kiss. I cannot think of anything better. Nothing. This is like the absolute pinnacle of all my, like I said, everything I was doing in school, math test. Okay, math test, great. Here, you know what? The teacher might appreciate this picture of Ace Frehley here in the corner.
I've got talents.
She didn't appreciate it. I think I told that story. I once turned into a thing with a picture of Gene wagging a bloody tongue or something, and the teacher wrote beside it, "I did not ask for this."
Yes.
Actually,
I'm like, no, but look, it's great.
Actually, I know you. I think you shared that one, but I know I didn't share this quick side story for talking about art. My art teacher in elementary school asked us to do kind of like the frou-frou artist from the 70s. I wasn't on that train of thought. That's the soup can.
Oh,
Andy Warhol.
He wants to do Warhol type things where it's like it was the 4 panels with different colors, this, that, and the other. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And he had like all this clip art. And I was like, I said, I want to do a guitar. And he was like, well, what kind of guitar? I was like, I like Ace Frehley's Gibson guitar, Les Paul. And I started spitting all the nerds. And he just kind of looked at me and goes, oh, you like Kiss? So it's like he let me do any art project to be Kiss related. I was the one few one, and he goes, I have some Kiss records. He goes, is it okay if I give them to you? I was like, yeah. He goes, well, I just gotta check with your mom first. And about a week later, he walks me out to the car, and he had Lick It Up and Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits, but both were radio promos. They weren't actually bought in the store. And he was like, hey, your son says he really likes Kiss, and I've got these. I don't use them. I use CDs these days. Do you guys want them? And she was like, yeah, if you got any other Kiss things you don't want. So similar stories on at least art in school, but at least mine was appreciated.
Right.
But yeah, so Dynasty. And
so we'll get gathered up, and Dad's laying down the heavy news. Kiss is coming to Roanoke. And
in a radio voice, too, like you're hearing it on the radio.
Like, boys. And he gets, Dad had this weird, he had a way of like working us,
Yeah.
And he's like, boys, the paper says Kiss is coming to Roanoke. Would you? I'll never forget that though. Would you like to go?
Nah.
God damn it. There's two things that I will always stick with me with my dad, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
It's like it's one of those moments you never forget. The other time I did something and made him angry, and he because the other side of my dad from the radio voice was when he got mad.
Ooh.
I made him mad one time, and I knew I was in trouble, and I started to cry. I was pretty small. I might have been 6'7" or something. Mm-hmm. And he goes, Russ, calm down. He got into the radio voice. He goes, calm down. I'm not mad. Russ, I'm not mad. I'm furious!
Oh, my God.
So those are the two things that will linger for the rest of my life. I will never forget either one of these things, but I prefer to remember the "Would you like to go?"
Yes, that's a more fun memory.
That was like one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. Except, of course, fate had already been decided for me. This conversation had been had between my mother and my father before they even told us.
Right. And side note, this would have been July 10th.
Well, the concert, we'll get to that, but this is the announcement in the paper. So this was Easter 79. Had to have been Easter. I can't think of any other reason why we would have been at my grandparents' house. And so Mom and Dad had already previously discussed this before he told us. And it was decided that my brother, being 12, would be allowed to go. But there was no way Mom was going to let her baby boy go. Baby Russ was not going to get to go to no crazy ass rock concert with drugs and sex and
fire and
orgies
blood.
on whatever. I don't know what she thought went on, but she wasn't going to let me go. So they came up with a ruse. And I'm kind of surprised they did this because my mom, being super conservative Christian, right? They lied to me and said, he goes, Russ, I'm sorry, but it says you must be 10 years old to attend the concert.
No.
Oh, wow.
This is a lie, of course.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have known. It's not like I was going to go, give me that newspaper. Let me see that shit. I didn't think like that. It was just, I just assumed that was true, I didn't even, it didn't even occur to me that they would lie to me. And Mom wasn't present for this conversation, so maybe that's her out, that she didn't lie to me.
Right.
But it seemed like it would have been just as easy to say, Russ, you can't go. But they didn't want to do that, so they came up with this,
Well, if they had said, you just can't go, I already have a feeling with this, as much as you already set it up. Do you want to go to the moon? Do you want to go to Disneyland? Or do you want to go see Kiss? You would have probably started doing everything in your power to try and go. Extra chores, being extra super sweet and nice, anything you thought could have done. And they were probably wanting to save that, being like, oh my God, I don't want him up our ass for the next 2 to 3 months bugging us about this fucking show.
So, anyhow... That's how we found out that they were coming. And then right around the same time, Dynasty popped up in the stores. We talked about that, I think, on the last episode.
Yeah.
So back to the
Well, before we move away from that show, have you looked up audio bootlegs of that gig?
Yes,
because there are some that exist.
I found recently a picture that was taken of some contest winners backstage.
Oh, really?
With a DJ named Bart Prater, who I knew his face because he used to be on the telethon, the MDA telethon every year. He was one of the local guys. So I and that's what I spotted. That's what made me even look to see that it was Roanoke. I was like, that looks like Bart Prater. And I was like, damn, I've never seen this picture before. But
cool, man.
So Kiss has got this, they're planning this gigantic, enormous tour. It's planned to do only a market venues. Like their idea is that, instead of going to little podunk towns like Dothan, Alabama, or Des Moines, Iowa, or Boise, Idaho,
South Carolina,
or whatever, these towns that they had hit regularly on previous tours because they were always trying to build and they were taking anything they could get. Now they're only going to play the New York Cities and the Chicagos and the Detroits and the big media centers, or the big city in any state. And the idea is they would play multiple nights in every city. The guarantee that they're asking for this from promoters is in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. It's $40,000 and $50,000 per show,
right? Which
back then was probably a sizable figure, but probably a fair one.
It's a lot of today money.
The problem is that for this to work, the promoters need to have a sellout in order for the promoter to make any money himself.
Right. Well,
we're going to see this isn't going to happen. Meanwhile, the laser show they planned for this. I forgot to mention that. They planned to have lasers, and I think Blue Oyster Cult was already touring with lasers. I think they were the first band to be using that on the road.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the geeky nerd side of me, of course, kind of leaned into that side and kind of looked into it a little bit more. This was very primitive early lasers. They had to still be water cooled. They were very temperamental.
Yeah.
It wasn't even like the technology we had, later on in the 90s with like laser pointers.
Right.
It's like this was extremely high tech, expensive technology.
Right.
And Paul was wanting to wear one on his fucking face.
Yeah, he was. Well, Paul didn't. They had the idea that he could have some sort of optic cable, I guess, that it would give the illusion that he was shooting a laser from his eye,
like he does in the fucking
like
movie.
he does in the movie. And
he was supposed to use it during. I think he was saying they wanted to use it during the Black Diamond guitar intro. That way they could blow fog around and then have it kind of like shooting out and it kind of looking, like it's just coming straight from his eye and just kind of moving around. But then also kind of thinking about it in today's standard, it's like, if those super low-powered laser pointers of the 90s was always talking about don't shine that shit in your eye.
Yeah, I think that's ironic, isn't it?
Right? It would be coming from his eye, and he would be looking at the audience, shining it also directly in their eye.
I don't know that he was going to be... I don't know. I don't know how this was supposed to work. They decided it was too risky. It scared him really bad to have it that close to his eye.
Yeah.
The other idea is they were going to have the stage encaged with laser lights, like a laser cage.
Yeah.
Almost something like they would eventually do on the Revenge Tour, because they had that really They also kind of used it on the Hot in the Shade tour. They had these really intricate lasers behind them where they could do
come out,
and then they could also have it like do different stuff during songs. Like I remember during like Forever, they kind of had like an oceany looking vibe on it that kind of gave it this aura. So
yeah, I saw that tour and I don't rightly remember. I remember it. We'll get to that.
Yeah. But just talking about it, even took like that long for that sort of laser technology to even become feasible.
Yeah, and it doesn't work, and it causes a lot of grief and problems with the company that they brought in to do it. But I didn't go too deep into that because I didn't think it was really relevant. Other than to say it didn't work.
Yeah.
No, and the only other bit of info Paul references in his book that they tried taking that company to court for years and eventually just lost.
Yeah,
they couldn't get their money back, but they honestly tried because they saw it as such a failure.
Well, the whole startup cost for this tour is $2.2 million.
Woo!
And
part of that was they had an A stage and a B stage because they were also thinking that they were going to do so crazy on this tour, sales figure wise, that they needed to have it set up to where they could have a separate stage going to the next city to be set up.
Well, did they do that though?
They eventually didn't.
Okay.
But that was the initial plan, is they were going to have an A and a B stage. That way they could already ship that next stage off to the next city, get it set up, and then so they would have two road crews.
Overlapping, yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Well, the other thing that I think is interesting about this is, they come up with this complete cockamamie idea of something called Kiss World.
Yes.
And this is a traveling...
They or Gene.
Yeah, I think this is a Gene idea. This really got a sizable amount of development. And this is the kind of stuff that they're just blowing money on. This is just money spent that they see no return on. This is a traveling carnival / theme park, with rides and attractions, all Kiss themed, of course.
Of course. And didn't they even purchase like a piece of land that they were going to have like a stationary version of?
No, I don't think so. I think they were just looking at properties that they could do it at, because it had to be somewhere adjacent to the arena, but it had to be large enough for, the logistics of this is what really ended up killing it. Just the idea of it. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's like you can't set it up in the arena parking lot because you can't swallow up parking for the arena. So you would have to find somewhere close to the arena, and you got to deal with zoning and again, the space, just the overhead is overwhelming, and that was enough to kill it. They even secured a circus promotion to pull it off.
Yeah.
So this is money again. They're just spending this money. There's money before they even play the first date, and they're already. I mean, this thing is huge.
And that's why I was saying, like, at this point, it feels like that sycophant behavior where no one is telling anyone no until they get to that first gig, which we'll get to. But it's like at this point, everything is just being told yes and just roll.
Well,
because they have a successful single and a successful album too.
It's doing pretty good, I guess. And but this is before the album's even released. The album's released, I think, in May. Didn't we say? I can't remember.
Yeah, which would be only a month before the tour started.
Okay.
So some of the opening acts that they have scheduled for this, most of it I think is going to be opened by, or maybe
New England.
I guess
for the most part,
of it was
right?
New England,
and that was a group that Paul was producing, right?
Paul was co-producer. If I don't know if anyone's ever taken the time out to listen to this stuff, this band New England.
There's a lot of names on the 1979 list that
It's not great, but it's not terrible. Just depending on what your tastes are. It's sort of a post-glam kind of thing, sort of sweet Queen.
Pretty 1979.
Kind of by way of Cheap Trick. It's not as like,
I might want to check that out. I've never gone into that deep dive, but you explaining that sounds like stuff I'd like.
It's interesting that despite this, high-profile gig that they've got opening for Kiss, they don't break. Nothing really happens for this band. Some of the members would eventually break off and form a new group called Warrior. And they had a guitar player in Warrior named Vincent Cusano. But we'll talk about Vincent Cousin.
I don't know if it's hard. I was like, oh shit, it goes that deep.
It goes that deep.
There's a lot of names on this opener list that I haven't done any deep dives on or anything like that. We've got groups like Nantucket who haven't done any research on.
Nantucket is we are in North Carolina. They were a North Carolina-based act.
Okay.
And they had a couple of minor hits in that era. I once worked with a guy. I was a keyboard player in Nantucket. I opened for Kiss at the Charlotte Coliseum in 1979. And
it was pretty cool, man.
That's cool. I don't know if you're lying to me, but okay.
There's a group called Whiteface that's on there too.
I don't know what that is. But some of the more name bands, Judas Priest opened a few shows. John Cougar and
the Zone.
Yeah, so John Cougar on his early runs, and Loverboy opens a show in Toronto and gets booed off stage.
Oh wow!
I didn't catch that.
This is their own hometown, man.
Oh
wow! I think holy shit. Another band, and this is noteworthy for a reason. Another band called Breathless is going to open some of these shows.
Yeah, I saw that too.
I listened to that too, and I found it to be. My notes say innocuous keyboard-driven pop rock.
Yeah,
I have no memory of it. The drummer, however, was a guy named Kevin Valentine, and he's going to play large in the latter era of Kiss history.
Okay.
When he plays drums on the Psycho Circus album, uncredited. He also plays, I think he might play on, I don't remember. We'll get to that. But it's interesting that, these figures are starting to pop up, that you're going to see their names again as time goes on.
What about the Rockets?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm getting, every time I see their name, I get them confused with a band out of LA called the Rockats.
Okay.
Levi and the Rockats. And I don't know why that, I guess Rockets and Rockats, it's not the same thing, but for some reason that just always gets me confused. So I don't really know anything about the Rockets.
Apparently they were formed by Jimmy McCarty and drummer Johnny Bandajic? Johnny B. Anyway, former members of Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels.
Those guys were played with Mitch Ryder. The last date that Kiss has played on tour was in February of 78, February 3rd of 78, the final show they have done prior to this, Providence, Rhode Island. Well, no, the last previous date was April 2nd, 78 in Tokyo. And then they played, of course, in May of 78, May 19th for the movie.
Right.
Which we talked about in the previous episode. Go back and check it out in the archives, as they say.
Yes.
Check it out in the archives. And
Guilty.
The first Dynasty show is scheduled for June 15th, 1979. That is a 15-month layoff for Kiss, which is a huge expanse of time. But as we've detailed in the previous episodes, it isn't like they've been sitting on their hands.
No.
There's been a lot going on.
And speaking of a lot going on, I'm really glad you said that. One of the other things I remember running across that I was reading just now and it reminded me was not only were they trying to get the Kiss World traveling amusement park set up, they were also in talks with Hanna-Barbera to do an animated series.
Well, we talked about that in a previous thing. That was all part of the process that led to the Phantom of the Park.
Not necessarily, because talks with this started in autumn of 78. And it never really got past conception stage, anything else. A few of the artists later on, I think in the 90s, were being asked about this, and they said that like a few of their animators, like on lunch breaks, would kind of draw like idea sketches, but it never really went that far. But Gene was in talks with Hanna-Barbera to do a Kiss animated series, but the one thing that held it back was time logistics. Scooby-Doo, for instance, would take 2 years altogether to complete a season start to finish.
Right.
So it took a good handful of years for animation at that time to really get it all edited, colorized, voices, and then ready for TV. And it was just timing logistics and amount of money that they were trying to spend that it never really got past like the concept stage.
I wonder if any of that exists, that art. I'd love to be able to see that.
Yeah, just the little bit I was reading in here, it said no one really did much with it, so I'd highly doubt it. It sounds like it was like napkin sketches, being like, "Oh, we could maybe draw
I'm
Kiss
sure
like
that
this."
somebody somewhere had to have kept something.
That would honestly that would be
something
cool.
that'd be cool to pop up.
Yeah.
So they're setting up in Lakeland, Florida, in the rehearsals for this because apparently they could get the arena essentially for free.
Right.
I don't know who did the routing for this tour, but as we see, this thing's kind of got some, where it ends and at what time of year is kind of crazy. But so they play their first 2 shows, I guess, in Lakeland.
Technically,
one was canceled.
One was
the
canceled.
very first show on the tour was
already
canceled.
out of the shoot.
That's what I was referencing earlier, being like until that first show, but
the first show right out of the shoot, and they're already realizing they're going to have to start picking up all the B markets to make this show even remotely financially feasible.
And one aspect that we also hadn't really touched on is kind of the volatility of really all 4 members at the time. Gene was kind of on his way out at this point. He was kind of becoming what everyone in the band was calling Hollywood. He was starting to kind of disassociate a little bit more with, we have to get into the whole rumory side, with he was dating Cher around this period and, kind of living and I think he had moved out to LA even, so it's like he was kind of changing his roots and moving out. Ace was going through his drug problems. Peter was being extremely erratic and Paul was on a huge ego trip. So Peter, being probably the most volatile of the 4 at the time, he was even giving the quitting noises before the tour started. And I've listened back to even some of those tour rehearsal stuff from the Lakeland, Florida stuff. And God, it's stuff that things that he was already kind of maybe a little bit sloppy on the Love Gun tour was like, wow, he's already kind of hitting that spot.
The bootlegs of this really show how erratic they are. There's some that are pretty good, and then there's a lot that are pretty.
So it's
not.
like internally for Kiss, they're already a little nervous about starting the tour.
About this is the fracture of all this comes post really the solo albums, and they've inadvertently set themselves up in adversarial positions as opposed to a team or a cohesive band unit.
And then sure as shit, like we said, first show canceled. And even Paul mentions in his book, he's like, if that wasn't an omen of things to come.
Oh yeah.
And that was because it says here on the Wikipedia page that they needed more rehearsal time for the June 14th date, but I'm sure there was something a little bit more to it.
I don't know. They were there for like a week, I think.
Everything that I saw that was explained never really gave a reason. Everywhere it just kind of said it was canceled. Right. Not really citing any, it was kind of implied ticket sales.
The tickets weren't, the ticket sales were soft. It's interesting also to note that Gene wears a slightly different costume on these first 2, or the first 2 shows, not just Lakeland, I guess the day after, whatever show was after that, which was a more kind of a studded, kind of encrusted.
Yeah, he almost had a bunch of rhinestones kind of plastered all about.
It was a little different, and then it turned into what I call the crumpled up tinfoil.
I was going to say,
I never understood what that was all about.
I've heard interviews and stuff from people later on, kind of looking at schematics, and they were honestly trying to go for Toho Godzilla. But they kind of missed the mark on that. But I've read up on how they actually made it. They took similar plating to like what football players use and started using that spray foam insulation on it. And would spray that on and then manipulate it as it was drying and then carve it and kind of shape it and then spray paint it.
Weird.
Or paint it, whatever.
Right over they did,
Yeah, but that's kind of how they got that look, was that weird foam sealant mixed with a couple other things and then kind of shaped it and carved it after that.
Okay.
Well, this is gearing up to be, looks like, I'm sure in their mind, this whole thing is they're starting in summertime, a big summertime tour. I mean, it's perfect time to tour. The kids are out of school.
Got a fresh, hot single.
They've had a hot single, and yet here they're already running into cancellations. Savannah, Georgia. 2 shows in Savannah scheduled.
Atlanta.
1 is canceled. Well, the Savannah show, they sort of salvaged a date because they used that canceled date to shoot their promotion, the videos. I guess you'd call them videos now. Then promotional films for I Was Made for Loving You and Sure Knows Something. Those are directed by a guy named John Goodhue, and he directed the video for Tom Petty's Refugee.
Okay.
And I think he did later on, Huey Lewis and the News had a hit with a song called "If This Is It."
Oh, when they're in the
They're on
beach and all that.
Yeah, same guy. But and then you know what? I don't have this. I meant to write this down. I actually know somebody that has firsthand knowledge of this. Ace goes fishing and gets a ticket or arrested or something for not having a fishing license.
And this is in the North, South Carolina, Georgia area?
I think this is in Georgia.
Okay.
And I can't remember the story on that, but she told me about it. And then it popped up in like 2 different Kiss books after the fact. And I was just like, because, you know, you get told something like that and you're like, well, that's interesting, you know, and you kind of wonder how how they remember what, you know, but I meant to go back and do research on that and I forgot.
That's funny, though.
It's just an interesting little anomaly that happened along the way.
You know, normally
and I just said anomaly in conjunction with Ace Frehley without any irony whatsoever.
Yeah, normally it's drunk driving or drug related.
Yeah, but no, he gets Ace, party guy, fishing.
Gets arrested.
And because we're kind of close in the dates anyway, because we are based in Charlotte, North Carolina, our usual their date for Charlotte wound up being what? June. Yeah, June. I just lost again. 24th at the Charlotte Coliseum. And my mom actually had a funny story on that one. She said that she was almost able to go to that one too, much like yours. And I can't remember because the 2020 special couldn't have happened by then.
No, not yet.
But there was something else that happened where it's like her parents were okay.
Yeah, you told us about that in the last episode. They saw it and they were like, no.
Actually, I think it was one of those, you know how parents will find any little reason to say no? I think I actually distinctly remember this one because she was like, I would never do this to you. She said that she was getting ready. She was at school talking with her friends about how the Kiss show that night was going to be so cool and awesome. And then she got home and she didn't do dishes properly and there was still a spoon left in the sink and she's like, you didn't do dishes right. You're not going to the show tonight.
Jesus.
Well, July 10th, they make it to Roanoke.
Yep.
You know, and I can remember that because it was like Christmas. And I remember the lead into this. They were doing big articles in our newspaper. They did a full color. It was a drawing of the Dynasty cover. Mm-hmm. And I remember they took up like the whole top half of this newspaper with, you know, and it was all, you know, I mean, it was a big deal. Kiss coming to Roanoke in 1979 was a huge deal. Things kind of shut down for a week. I mean, it was a really big thing.
Now, and this isn't, you know, speaking negatively on Roanoke, I lived there too, but would that have been considered an A market at the time?
No, that's what I'm saying. It's interesting. They had to pick up this, you know, it was considered to be, I mean, Roanoke was a standard stop for a lot of tours back then.
Okay.
And, you know, most people don't even know where Roanoke, Virginia is.
Right.
But it was, you know, one of the interesting factoids about Roanoke is there was an AM station there in the mid 70s that is credited with breaking the single for Blackwater for the Doobie Brothers, which became a big hit for them.
Oh, wow.
I don't know how that would have worked out of Roanoke, but apparently they were one of the first stations to really pick up on it, I guess. I don't know.
It's interesting, though.
But Roanoke became a hot, you know, and I think because of that, you know, a lot of tours came through Roanoke. I can remember in the late 70s, early 80s, you know, ELO and AC/DC and Cheap Trick and
big rock and roll town, huh?
On July 18th, they're in Cleveland, and this is when ABC comes and films their 2020 segment. In my opinion, the band comes off very poorly in this piece. It airs a month later. And ironically, the only one that seems grounded in this to me in any way, shape, or form, and not pompous and not dig me in my ego, is Peter.
Yep.
Peter's
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Earth, seems very chilled, very laid back, not
happy to be here.
Yeah, he's just, you know, he's reveling in the success without being like, dig me in my ego. He's like, you know, he's talking about, you know, one of the really great benefits of this is I'm able to provide stuff for my parents. I bought a home
just
for
about
them.
to mention that,
you know, whereas Paul's sitting there going, I feel like I'm important and I'm wanted by masses and all this stuff.
It really
and you're
gets
just
me
like,
off.
you know, and I'm like, I mean, I get it, you know, how can you not have that ego to be in that position where, again, everyone's, you know, telling you you're shit hot and you've built this big empire. And of course, it's all kind of a charade, because the very next day in Cleveland, it's an off day. And this is a very important event on this tour. They have a meeting with Carl Glickman, their business manager. And it is not a positive thing.
We have a problem.
They are discussing tour financing because they are hemorrhaging money, and it's a kind of the deal where they wanted to do a lot of cutbacks, and they figured, you talked about a B stage. They proposed a B show, a scaled back version, a less costly version of the Kiss show.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which of course was a non-starter.
Mm-hmm.
They could not have a B show. Kiss has to be Kiss.
Yeah.
Gene, of course Gene has to fly.
Mm-hmm.
This is
the thing too.
we didn't even mention this flying rig.
That's the very first tour that had the flying rig.
They had the flying rig.
And the earlier episodes, the earlier dates was actually slightly different. So eventually, even in most of the bootleg shows that we get, you see him just fly straight up into the rafters. Before, it was proposed for him to fly up, and then he would fly side by side.
Oh, yeah, side to side.
Yeah, so he would kind of fly to the right side of the stage for a second, then fly all the way to the other, and then land in the center.
They ended up creating a contraption like that for Garth Brooks years later, and that's where he got the idea.
Yeah. I'd love to see high quality footage, because they said they did it for like the first 3 or 4 shows.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, it got used for a couple dates, but then eventually it was just like I think something happened, or it was like freaking Gene out way too much, and he's like, just pull me straight up.
This was a bad idea. This was a bad idea.
Well, the business managers proposed this B show, a scaled back version. And of course, this is refused outright. And they're confronted with hard numbers. And the number I have, according to their business managers and what I've read, was, look, you're going to lose $1 million on this. Lose money. You're not going to make money on this tour. You're going to lose. Not only are you going to lose money, you're losing $1 million on this tour. And the great quote I've got is a flippant response from Paul Stanley. It's cheaper than not touring. This shows
where his head is at.
A sizable delusion here.
Yeah.
It's cheaper than not touring.
Okay, well, here would be my question, though. So understanding kind of like the businessy side of it, is that just one of those quotes that are kind of weirdly misquoted? Because, okay, maybe they were proposing because I know that we're going to get ahead of ourselves a little bit, but Paul also does mention that tensions got so high with Peter near the latter part of the tour, they were ready just to call it quits and go home. And that Bill had to basically talk them off the ledge and explain, it's only a few more dates and then roll. That. Well, okay, so if you don't believe that, let's combine that story with this interview.
I mean, I believe that he says that story, and I believe maybe he believes it. Mm-hmm. I don't think they would ever have seriously considered that at this point.
Well, so if not, let's take if we're always looking for the true side of it, let's take little facts from that and apply it to this story. Maybe they were telling Kiss, you need to either scale it back, but Paul's going, if we cancel the rest of the dates, it would cost us more than $1 million. Maybe that's where it's kind of going. All the promises we've made would cost us more than $1 million than if we wrote it out.
Right,
and crews and everything.
That's
too.
not what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is to scale it back. And that's not even an option.
Right.
It's like all or nothing here, which in a way shows that dogged kind of determination and that shows a sizable kind of integrity in and of its own right. But at the same time,
delusional.
You look back to the very beginning, and they, again, even in the earliest days, Bill Aucoin was financing it on his fucking credit card. Mm-hmm. They can't understand that there's no way to pay for this,
and they also
because they've always
had it taken
care of.
And they also weren't aware until the next album just how much money they were truly hemorrhaging due to overhead costs from Aucoin, because they were still a bit in the dark of how little money they were actually getting.
We're going to get to that here in a minute. On July 23rd, a couple of days later, a very important thing happens that we'll get into in another episode. But Larry Harris, the senior vice president of Casablanca, quits the company because he knows he can see where it's all going, and not just for Kiss, but for Casablanca. That's why he's not, Casablanca just happens to be their label, but
Yeah.
Things are not only bad for Kiss, they're also bad for their label.
It's kind of on its last legs at this point.
It's all starting to crumble here. And Larry Harris says, you know what? And this is the guy who helped form the company. He's actually Neil Bogart's cousin, if I remember correctly. So he's the second guy, and he's like, I'm out of here.
Yep. I'm out of here.
July 24th, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th.
All New
5
York
days,
City.
all held for Madison Square Garden.
Yep.
Only 2 shows are put on sale.
Yep.
This kind of gives them the longest break they have on this tour in a weird way. They do play a show in Portland, Maine on the 28th. Or no, I've got the 20th. That's not right.
They played Cumberland County Civic Center in Portland on the 28th.
Okay, well then, that's because the 28th didn't happen for MSG. So they only played the 2
was
shows.
Supposed to be another Madison.
So they had a little break because of these shows that didn't get put on sale. They didn't do.
Yeah. But the thing is between the 22nd and the 29th, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3. They have between 4 to 5 cancellations.
Yeah.
Just in that short little time span.
So this tour isn't really doing what they hoped it would do.
And it's mostly low ticket sales for the canceled dates.
And this is all in the summertime. They haven't even traveled into the cooler fall and winter months yet. But this is basically the only break they have on the tour. But the perception of Kiss is still very, very large, and perception, kind of leads the whatever.
I mean, they built a whole career on it.
And there's a TV show called Benson that premieres in September of this year. It's a spinoff from a TV show called Soap, which was a parody of soap operas. And the character Benson was a popular character. He was like the butler in the TV show. Mm-hmm. And in the spinoff, he goes to work for the governor. And, comedic hijinks ensue. Right. But on like, I think it's the second episode of that first season, there's a plot line that involves the governor's preteen daughter sneaking off to a rock concert. And who does she wants to go see? Kiss.
Of course.
So
it's still on the
and
forefront
the idea
of...
that the daughter is a preteen is very, I think, signifies also who their audience is.
Yeah. And do you subscribe to the belief that the band was kind of... everyone kind of mentions that they were, in so many words, weirded out by the fact that they had gotten such a young audience?
I don't know, because they say that now. Again, a lot of this we get in hindsight. We get a lot of like revisionist history. We get a lot of like, we knew.
I've always been confused by that, because all of their actions leading up to it was gaining that younger audience. All the knickknacks, the action figures, the comic books, the TV movie where they're superheroes. Everything that they've done leading up to that point felt like they were trying to create that younger audience. So for them to flip around and talk about in the middle of the Dynasty tour, Paul would break out in a cold sweat seeing how many preteens were out there. He was like, this would prove to be later detrimental for us at the time. The only good thing was that there was a bunch of single moms out there.
Whatever. Look up and see. Look up. Did Sammy Hagar open any dates on this tour?
Well, he did not.
Okay, because there's a story about Sammy Hagar getting kicked off of this tour because he swore on stage. So if he didn't even open for him, that's kind of weird.
Not on this tour.
But apparently that was a no-no at any point. They were aware that they had the young audience. The idea here, the idea here is that is by design, but that's not by design from the band. That's by design from the management. Bill Aucoin had this idea that if he caught them while they were young,
they become lifelong.
They would be lifelong fans.
And was Aucoin correct?
And was he not right?
I mean, look at us now.
Bill Aucoin, we're gonna talk about Bill Aucoin at length here in another episode, but the guy really was
a marketing genius,
wicked smart. He was wicked smart, dude. No, he was though, and there was gonna. the problem was they weren't taking into account the idea of Kiss as a fad. And I hate to say it, but at this point, Kiss is a fad. And
because they released such popularity,
and because of what they were doing, this whole thing. I mean, it was going to play itself out, and here it is. It's playing itself out. September 19th, Fort Wayne, Indiana. A private meeting is held in a Holiday Inn conference room with Bill Aucoin and the band, and a lot of rumors were already flying. They had them fly in. They did it in this low key, not a big city kind of place, and a B market. Right. They did this on purpose, and everyone thought, okay, this is it. Bill's getting fired. The road crew were convinced that this is it. Instead, this is almost comical. Instead, they just reduce it. They give him a 2-year contract extension, but they reduce his commission from 20%. So basically, he's like a fifth member.
Yeah.
He gets a full percentage.
And we ran through that before. It's like not only did he get a full percentage, but he was still getting his pay cuts
commission for running
stuff.
for running the merchandise.
So he was still at this point the most well-paid, quote unquote, member of that group.
And they cut him from 20% to 18.5%.
I thought it was 18, but yeah, 18
what a huge cut, man. I mean, it would make sense if you looked at it and went, okay, they cut him from 20 to 15.
Right.
That would be like, okay, that makes sense. 18, who came up with that number? There's a part of me that thinks they're sitting in there and they're working all this out, and Bill's just outfoxing them going, well,
that's what I'm thinking.
Like they went in with the 15.
We're going to cut you. We got to cut you. Well, how about, well, I'll take a commission cut. I don't know. But he also is no longer going to receive commission on tour income. However, the tour staffing, which he is paying for, he's no longer responsible for. So that cost transfers over now to the band. That's $250,000 a year.
Yeah. Poor guy.
And they've basically relieved him of a huge amount of burden.
Yeah, now we're going to cut your commission a little bit. We're also going to take away this big bill.
Yeah, none of this makes any fucking sense. Now, maybe I'm just missing something completely, and while I'm researching this, because I'm not, I don't possess any grand business acumen. I'm just an average schmo that likes Kiss, right? Yeah. But none of this looks like, the way I'm seeing this makes no fucking sense.
I mean, unless there was extra things that, just hasn't been discussed that we're just not aware of. No, I feel like anyone could look at that and go, it's a wash.
And they want to, sometimes it's like they get sold or pass themselves off as like these business geniuses, and clearly they are not. No. It's like you look at this and you're like, huh?
And we hear a lot more about how much they're not business geniuses by their management choices throughout the 80s. But again, we will get to that. Yeah. We're almost there, too.
Yeah.
That almost feels like it's so far away. But no, this is coming up in like a couple episodes, too.
A couple of weeks later, they make an in-store appearance at a record store called Great American Music. I think this is in... I don't know. You know what? I have it as Indiana, but I'm not sure. But either way, it's just odd because at this point they seem to be above having to do this sort of kind of
appearances,
promotional appearances.
Right.
And here they are at the height of Kissdom,
Spinal tapping it.
They're signing records at a record store.
Well,
it's not like they're signing records in New York City or Los Angeles, making a big, huge spectacle out of it. They're in Indiana.
Right.
It's like, who put this together and why?
It's a Heartland, man. I don't know. Yeah, you're right.
Maybe it is one of those weird things where, okay, so let's look at it purely from a business tactics standpoint, not from a making sense for a fan standpoint. They have huge followings in Detroit, New York, all this stuff. And maybe they have decent followings in Indiana. But you know what? They haven't gotten as many experiences. So to heighten the fandom even more, let's have them show up at a record store. because you know what? They're not going to get mobbed there, and they can create special memories in the heart and, in all these tiny little places, and these people are going to push the Army even further. Maybe that was a aspect of it.
But that would make sense if they were doing that intermittently along the tour. This is an isolated single. It's a one-off thing.
Okay. Yeah, that would make sense that they did it on the regular. Like if there was maybe 5 or 6 of those.
We need to move tickets, make record store appearances. Maybe that's part of it.
Maybe they're just trying to make up for that 1.5% commission loss or something. I don't fucking know.
Because the other thing too is, it still makes sense for Kiss to do that because they were doing it during the solo album tours. They would go and hit record stores and do signings.
But this just seems so odd to me. But
it is
at
odd.
Any rate, on October 27th, they're in Abilene, Texas. And PBS has a show called 3-2-1 Contact, which is a science show for kids and an implied science. And what better way to show the application of science than to go to a concert, and what better concert than Kiss? So they film Kiss in Abilene, Texas, and create 2 segments out of it. One is on light and one is on sound. I can remember watching this in 4th grade, and this just blew the fucking room apart when because we had no idea. Because what they would do back then is the librarian had a videotape recorder, probably a Beta recorder back then, and that was state of the art shit back then.
Oh yeah, man.
And they had cable, which was another thing. Yep, they roll out the TV and they bring it up to the classroom and they play the tape, and we would watch 3-2-1 Contact. And when Kiss popped on the screen, man, that room just came alive. The teachers were like, shh, shh, shh. They were like, yeah! I mean, it's their primary target audience. It's like a room full of 4th graders.
Yeah, man.
And I don't know that I was aware they did 2 episodes. I can't rightly remember, but I can remember watching at least one of those in 4th grade, and the impact it had. Of course, now this is readily available stuff on YouTube. I don't know what that girl's name, but God damn it!
Of all of them, that's actually one I haven't.
Wait. She fine. She fine.
Just saying.
But sorry.
Of all the things, I actually have not looked that one up. I've watched. I guess maybe because I felt it was going to be too similar to the Land of Hype and Glory, where they kind of did a little bit of that backstage run of showing the way everything ran. Maybe that's why I hadn't looked it up, but I've actually not watched those bits yet.
It's really cool. It's a really good detailing of how that stage was assembled. And it's got some really good,
but not the front to back.
It's really interesting because they come in and shows the load in. It shows them, there's the guy that walks the lighting truss. At the time, that lighting truss was like I think this was the largest mobile stage in the world.
Wow!
If you look at it now, that lighting truss looks like
something we'd have in one of our tiny clubs here in town.
But back then, it's an octagonal kind of shaped with the diagonal cross lines. And then there's a guy that plays with the audio and does some voice manipulation with it.
Okay, that's cool.
Stuff.
So I guess for stuff like God of Thunder
and I want to say
like
that Ken McManus, who's like part of their crew or whatever, or part of the crew that does the staging and what have you, he's featured. Very nerdy kind of thing. He holds a color gel over the girl's face. He goes, "I put this gel up, you look like Dracula." And but it's fun and it's cool. And like I said, if you can find these on YouTube, and they're worth looking if you're into this stuff, because particularly on the staging and the construction of it, it's pretty interesting. Because when they started this show, they had a very difficult time trying to figure out how to make it all work and how to get it loaded in and out, so in a timely fashion,
efficiently. And
by this point, they've got it down to like clockwork. It's a huge stage for its time, but it's pretty interesting, all the little
nuances
of how you see them put the I think there's a time lapse thing where you see them put they put the Kiss sign together and stuff. And it's really, really cool. It's cool that this stuff exists, that you can go back and look at it. December 8th in Shreveport, Shreveport, Louisiana. Peter sabotages the show.
I was going to ask when that was, because we read all about this in every memoir.
This is fucking bizarre. But he drags the tempo of God to Thunder to like slower and slower and slower until it just sort of grinds to a stop.
Like on purpose.
And they all leave the stage. And, I haven't seen any real detailed reporting as to what happened when they all left the stage, but obviously
we can only imagine.
I'm sure there was a lot of "fuck you, no fuck you."
Yeah, all the heavy New York coming out.
Which I think anybody that's ever been in a band, eventually, you know what, your band has that.
Yeah.
There's that moment when everyone's like, "Fuck you, no fuck you, no fuck you."
We've had mild versions of that even over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
what we
just
don't
happens.
hear about is what most bands usually have after that, where they all go,
I love you, Not so much after this.
I don't think this happens here.
No.
They return to the stage, play 2 more songs, and it's "Thank You, Shreveport" and "Good Night." And I don't think they even play "Rock and Roll All Night." I don't think, it's like, what's going on here? And the tour finally winds up on December 16th in Toledo, Ohio. And this is the last show with all 4 original members for another...
Till 1996.
Until 1996. Now, you think, though, if you look at this is kind of a sad ending, because this tour is ground down. They're ending in one of the most depressed towns in America, in one of the worst economic times in American history, and it's cold. It's winter time. This has to be miserable. It has to be it's just a miserable way to end a miserable tour. And, now that this is over, it's over.
Yeah.
This is never going to be the same again, ever. Ever. This is the end. Mm-hmm. This is the
of that era.
End. It's the end of not only an era, it's really the end of Kiss. Because everything that exists after this is based and built and centered around what has happened in this previous 3-year period. Everything.
You're
if
right.
this 3-year period had not happened... And we've talked about this. If they broke up in 75, which they very nearly did when
Before Alive
went build, everything from 76 to 79, I mean, this defines what this band does even today.
Yeah.
This band has no reason to exist, but except for this one little window of time, which is, 3 years is a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a blink of an eye. And look at what they've accomplished in this short period of time.
Yeah.
And they've just ran themselves down to nothing.
And we talk about it in most of the episodes leading up to this. Like, they don't take any breaks. They just been on the go since 1974, and nothing has changed even in this time period.
They've not been granted any kind of... they got their solo albums or whatever, and
right,
blah,
but
blah,
they're
blah,
still
but
working and recording and everything too.
79 shows over 6 months in North America alone. They never tour anywhere else in the world for Dynasty. Mm-hmm. And they will not tour North America again for another 3 years. Think about this. The 3 years prior to this, there's going to be another 3-year period where they will not tour America at all.
Yeah.
And there's so much change yet to come. But this is the end. This really is the end. The book is closing here, because when they do reconvene, it's going to be a different band.
Yep.
In a very real sense.
And one very important thing that happened this year that we did not touch on, and I was trying to see if it was recorded at a different date or filmed live, but I literally had the day, October 31st. Of 79.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was the infamous Tomorrow with Tom Snyder interview.
I was about to ask when that popped up.
And I was trying to look up some additional information to see if it was pre-recorded on a different date and then aired, or if they were kind of doing like that pseudo live where there was only like a little bit of buffer time.
You know what? I think we talked about that on the previous episode.
To a point, yeah, but we did. We actually
never found that out, though.
No, and I actually did a dive into the Tomorrow Show just to actually find out the way they film things. Everything talked about preview shows and kind of like some format changes, but they never really described what the actual filming process was. If it was, because even like the live with late night shows that happen now, they're filmed during the day.
Yeah, I'm sure they're recorded in the afternoon.
Yeah,
that's
and
not
then they
unusual.
do a fast edit and then air it that night.
Right, I'm sure that was the same thing. Mm-hmm. But they were playing that night. So, and where were they scheduled? Texas. So I can't see them.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So at some point,
wasn't Tom Snyder in New York?
I'm pretty sure. I'm wondering if they did that back in July when they had that.
But that would also make sense, especially if it didn't air later on. Well, I don't know. They reference the video they're watching. They show preview shots.
Well, they showed the clips that they filmed in Savannah for the Sure Know Something, and
you're okay, yeah.
So that might have been the first time that ever got aired too.
See, we're kind of piecing it together. Yeah. That's why I wanted to revisit that. Yeah, so I bet you that stuff was filmed about a month or so prior, and then they eventually got it released on that October show. But I still love that interview though.
It's classic for sure.
But it's interesting to note too, in some of my additional research for it, no one really cared then. Like, no news articles really discussed the crazy interview. It was only in retrospect.
Oh, yeah. And I think, it's interesting if they did film that in advance and way in advance of it being aired.
Why so much of it didn't get cut?
Yeah, then they could have gone, you know what, we don't want that used. But then again, they may not have had leverage to, but they would have known it was coming, and they would have probably done something to prepare themselves for it. Yeah, no one seemed to be really that bothered. I mean, you can tell that they're probably a little annoyed. They always make it look like, oh, look, you can tell they're pissed. They're pissed. Gene's pissed. I never looked at it that way. I could see them being annoyed. But I think by that point they were quite used to that behavior, and it was not out of line or in any way unusual for them to have to contend with that.
No, the face I saw from Gene was being annoyed that every time he tried to talk, he would get interrupted.
Right.
And I make that face quite often. Hell, in my retail job, I actually had to stop someone. I was like, that it's not with just me, but anytime someone starts to talk, you just immediately start talking, and it's just it's just a general annoyance thing of just being cut off in conversation.
And of course, the highlight of that interview is Ace Frehley.
Oh, yes, he's a plumber.
Yes,
but we talked about that on the previous episode. But it does sort of illustrate, it all leads down to this end moment. To think that, this concert in Toledo, December 16th. I mean, that's an historical moment because this is the end. I mean, it's the absolute end. This is never going to exist again, not in the same way.
Yeah.
When it comes back as a reunion thing, it's going to be largely a revival thing, or what's the word I'm looking for? Nostalgia, which is fine. I'm not crumbing on that. And I gave my money to that quite happily.
Right.
But
the thing
is Kiss is a viable, for lack of a better term, groundbreaking or spearheading kind of a thing. It's never going to be that again.
And they themselves didn't even know that it wasn't going to be the same again.
No one did because
when Peter was invited back for rehearsals for Unmasked and everything else, and then the decision was made.
We'll talk about that in the next episode. But obviously, when they do reconvene, it's going to be a different Kiss because they're going to have a different member.
Yeah,
and
but again, just kind of even with that kind of remorse idea of what you're kind of going through, is just like, not even they knew on that final date of all that annoyance that would be the last time all of those members would step foot on stage again until the convention and MTV Unplugged.
And the changes that the band's about to experience, and this is all still makeup era. It's all for the next 3 years. It's still going to be makeup era Kiss, but there's still going to be huge monumental changes that are going to inform what they're doing, when they do it, and why they do it.
Yep.
And I think a lot of this stuff people don't take into account, or if they do, they kind of poo-poo it or whatever. But I think there's a lot of what's going to happen here that kind of leads into how they became what they were in the 80s. And for better or for worse.
I agree.
Because again, and I can't stress this enough, it's over. It's just like so final. It's almost like it's like almost like having a death in the family or something, but no one knows it. And it's like having a death in the family, but you don't find out about it until like a year later. And you're like, what? Grandpa died a year ago. I mean, this is kind of like this though, because just because of the fact that this defines the band completely to this day, everything they do, everything they will continue to do is built off the success they had in this period. And if they'd not had that success, none of the rest would have happened.
Yep.
Or if it would have happened, it wouldn't have really mattered. And in a way, a lot of it doesn't matter. And we'll talk about that.
He's right.
I'm not saying that I'm just saying,
I know.
If that had never existed, it would have made it makes no difference.
No, I agree.
This makes a difference because there's no other Kiss. There's nothing to compare Kiss to. It's short of Alice Cooper, which is not the same thing.
No.
There cannot be another Kiss. Anyone that tries to fit themselves into this paradigm is only going to be imitating Kiss.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. They cornered this and held it in a way that it's like you can't duplicate it. It is completely a unique, original thing, the likes of which will never, ever, ever happen again. It had never happened before. And
this is going to be controversial. This will be controversial, but I think the only band that even got close to doing it again, this is not me saying I'm a fan of the music or anything, but I think the only band that captured the imagination of teens again with secret identities, a more aggressive look, and no one knew who they were was Slipknot.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
They actually did that a little bit for that first, I think, like 6 or 7 years as a band, almost similar to Kiss. They did not. No one knew who they were behind the masks.
They didn't have the impact. They might
Not
have even,
as much.
They may have been a more commercially successful group than Kiss was in certain aspects. I don't know. I'm not
a fan either.
But they didn't have that cultural impact. It's like
maybe certain communities.
No,
but
Kiss
that's it.
was huge. There's never going to be a Slipknot TV movie, man. You know what I mean? They're not going to.
I see
just
where you're
not.
going.
I don't see that band ever getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
No,
I don't see people in even now, and that band's been around 20 years or whatever. I don't see people going. I can't even name the individual members of Slipknot.
I only know one, Joey Jordison.
And I'm just like,
problem with Slipknot is that there's too many members, but that's a whole other part.
Yeah. That's what we're divulging now.
I'm not shitting on Slipknot. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
I'm just saying Kiss is still the next level.
Oh, it is. And that's why I'm just saying, even them, though, I think they were the closest any other band got to it.
It's just like, this is something that was so big, and it just was, and huge. I think it's a product of its era.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it could have happened in any other time. There was a kind of a cynicism in the 70s, but it's not the same cynicism that we have today.
Yeah.
That people, they sort of embrace this sort of stuff. There was an escapist kind of, the cynicism was for escapism.
Yes.
And now the cynicism is you're cynical towards escapism. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And it's like we, as a culture, we embrace this stuff, and we've talked about this: the Evil Knievels and the Fonzarellis, and Lenny and Squiggy and Sha Na Na and Kiss. I mean, it all fits, and I don't think I can't think of any other time in American history, before or since, where you had such a concentrated era of so much like pop culture, whatever, thrown and it all stuck.
Yeah.
It all worked. It was like
universally.
It was all recognized. It was, because I think in a way now it's being, we're in an era, with the internet and what have you, you've got so much information coming at you. It's hard to assimilate it all. And it's like certain things do grab, obviously, but I don't think it's like quite the same.
Well, I think even in the large versions of pop culture today, I mean, I would consider myself a huge Marvel fan and a huge Star Wars fan. But even then, the fandoms for both of those, even though like Spider-Man No Way Home, the latest movie that's out by the time of this recording, it's going to be in the, top 10 films of box office wise over the last 10 years. I mean, it's doing huge. It's doing numbers that, pre-COVID had.
Right.
So, but it's still hard to even get fully assimilated into a Marvel fan base because there are so many people that are just like, kind of like okay with Kiss. Oh yeah, I like Kiss. That Rock and Roll All Night song.
Right.
The true fandom for the escapism isn't there. It's just to the point of escapism is such a modern day thing that no one truly latches onto it. It's so disposable.
Right.
And
well, that's going to play into a lot of what we're going to talk about as far as the 80s, because by the time of the late 80s, and it's just a 10-year stretch, we're talking about late 70s, inflation was high, we'd gone through the gas crisis or whatever. By the late 80s, it's back. It's almost like the 50s. You have a teen subculture, a teenaged subculture that has a large amount of disposable income. And, even the most unremarkable music acts can sell millions of records
because that is something
because you just bought it, they do that song and you can buy the cassette was the medium of choice. We'll talk about all this, but
I was gonna say that's all very important because I remember in our early episodes of No Time to Turn we also kind of discussed where political climates and socioeconomical and economics were at the time and how that kind of played into why Kiss in the early days did get that smaller pop in the smaller communities, because that was that version of escapism they wanted. And then with the way the economy is going to turn in the 80s, it does kind of shape the musical landscape some, and I don't think Kiss is fully prepared for that.
No, and the other thing that that I can speak from memory is this whole shift right now from the 70s to the 80s. It almost felt like it was a big thing about like it's going to be the 80s, like it's this whole new era is opening up.
Even the Ramones were singing it's the end of the century.
It was huge. It was like, but a lot of these established groups were trying to figure out how they, this was a big thing. How are we going to transition into the 80s and stay contemporary and stay current and relevant, and you see a lot, it's easy to see now, but you'll see like these groups kind of changing their sound and their approach,
and their
look and everything. Everyone started cutting their hair. That was a big thing back then, and a lot of this is getting informed by the punk and what they called quote unquote new wave subculture.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that manifest itself on a more of a mainstream commercial level, and they're adopting these sort of ideas, but they're still kind of applying them in their own way. And Kiss is going to be a part of this. How does Kiss transition into the 80s? How are they going to become an 80s group? And of course we'll explore all of that, and we'll do that in the upcoming episodes of No Time to Turn. We hope you guys will stick around for it, because things are going to get really interesting, and it's going to be confusing in a lot of ways. There's a lot going on, but
it's going to be fun.
We're getting ready to turn into 1980. We're going to see a lineup change. We're going to see a curiously named album that doesn't do what it claims. And we're also going to see Kiss's their Waterloo moment in an Australian tour.
Yeah, because as much as things are kind of dipping for them in the U.S.,
it's still popping in other places.
Big time. And maybe that's part of their delusion.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that on the next episode of No Time to Turn. So for Cap Nunn and Alex Stiff, I'm Russ Ward, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Please insert another coin by supporting the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/somethinggoodnetwork.